Welcome back to Sunday Night in America. Republicans were in the wilderness after President Obama won, and so-called experts shared free advice, which was worth exactly what we paid for it. And now Democrats are in the slough of defeat. If Jasmine Crockett is a thought leader of the party, Democrats will stay in the wilderness longer than Moses did.
I mean, he literally sounds like someone who is broken out of the insane asylum. Like, he just be all over the place. Like, get him some ADHD medicine, if nothing else, because I don't know where he's ever going to go. It is time for Republicans to start calling him out and start questioning his mental acuity and whether or not he is equipped to serve mentally. We know when it comes down to his criminality, he is not qualified to serve. But this is just absolutely deplorable.
You know, it's hard to know where to start with Ms. Crockett. She mocked the governor of Texas for being paralyzed. She conflates attention deficit disorder with insanity, which is both cruel and medically stupid. What she's really saying is that a majority of her fellow citizens voted for someone who's insane. So what does that make us? Here's some free political advice. Insulting voters typically is not a pathway to success. Joining us are Ben Domenech, editor-at-large at The Spectator, and Kevin Walling, a Democrat strategist. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Kevin, I have been around you both on and off air, and I have never heard you utter a mean-spirited comment in the whole time I've known you. Ms. Crockett belittled a paralyzed governor, conflates attention deficit disorder with insanity. There's clearly another way. I've never heard you do any of that. Is that really the path to winning national elections, to mock a guy in a wheelchair?
It isn't, Trey, and it's good to be with you. Listen, I think you actually give Congresswoman Crockett good advice. It's never a good idea to insult voters or to question why it is that they support one party or the other. You know, I'm married to a Republican from South Carolina. I just flew back from our home in South Carolina. I believe strongly in a bipartisan approach to win voters back to the fold. We've got elections coming up, not just 2 years from now in the midterms, but we got an election coming up in New Jersey and a key state, Virginia, in just 6 months. And insulting voters is not the path back for Democrats. It's being welcoming and giving a different approach to those Trump voters and a different path forward to bring them back to the fold.
All right, Ben, AOC and Jasmine Crockett represent single blue districts in New York and Texas. My math is as bad as Mrs. Crockett's grammar, but that's less than 0.5% of the country. Are folks who can't win in swing states really the right spokespeople for Democrats?
Well, I think, Trey, you know from the past experience that Republicans have had in the wilderness that sometimes there are these voices that emerge that say things that appeal to the extremes of the party. The problem, I think, for Democrats is that the extreme in their party is a much bigger chunk of their party than they need at this point in order to be able to bridge the divide that Kevin is talking about. What they should be leaning into is winning back the voters that they lost, particularly male voters across the country, who went from voting for Joe Biden or for not voting at all to voting for Donald Trump in 2024 and sending him back to the White House. And yet, I think as long as you have these extreme voices who really don't want to cross any divide, who believe that they should stake out the most extreme position in all of this, and who are calling their opponents consistently racists and fascists and denouncing them as being incapable of holding office, I think that there needs to be that consideration. And so if you don't have that, then you can end up as a party in the wilderness for a much longer time than just a couple of cycles.
All right, Kevin, Senator Ruben Gallego is the latest Democrat to conclude that biological men should not play sports against biological women. Gavin Newsom also had a belated and dubious epiphany. I don't think that's a winning issue for Democrats. What should they be talking about? What is the agenda they should be focused on?
Yeah, Trey, I think it's a bread and butter agenda. You're seeing a woman like Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, who's up in her primary election next week, talking about kitchen table issues, to return to the economy, to talk about tariffs. In our own Fox News polling, the president is underwater when it comes to the economy, when it comes to health care. And I think Democrats need to focus on those core issues, talk about Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and strengthening those and not getting bogged down in these cultural divides. To Ben's point, we lost ground with young men voters. We lost ground with Hispanic voters for the first time in a number of cycles for the Democratic Party. We've got to be a big tent, but we've got to appeal to the issues that these voters care about and are talking about at home, and not these distractions with cultural issues.
All right, you're both thoughtful, introspective men. Ben, let me ask you where we are with politics. I mean, you got a guy like Matt Gaetz who wore a gas mask on the House floor, which I guess is better than wearing it to a Chuck E. Cheese or a skating rink. Members argue over fake eyelashes and body types. Nancy Mace probably never read the Scarlet Letter, but she did buy the extra small version of the T-shirt. Are politicians to blame, or do we shoulder some of it for rewarding this kind of behavior?
Well, I think that the unfortunate thing that's happened, Trey, and I think you've probably observed this, is that we've moved into a situation where the Congress essentially does not function, and the people who are elected work as hype men for their side, you know, whether it be on the left or the right. And that's something that is very damaging, I think, to them being able to do their jobs, for one, but also damaging to the country, because you end up having a representation that is based on the number of likes you get, the number of clicks you get, whether you can, put the right thing out on TikTok or X or what have you. And that's not the way that we ought to have a governing body that is meant to be the most powerful body in terms of our breakup of government. And that's something that I think has to change, dependent on the voters demanding more of who they elect, demanding that they actually respond to the real concerns, the kitchen table issues that Kevin mentioned, as opposed to engaging in culture war commentary or insults that go viral that don't actually amount to anything at all. They get a lot of attention. They may get a lot of people clicks in terms of the media, but they don't actually do anything to make the country a better place or to make us a better people.
Yep, Congress is Article 1 for a reason. And Kevin, you need to get on the plane and get on back home to South Carolina as quick as you can.
Amen.
Thank both of you.
I'm heading there next week, and I could not agree more with Ben.
All right, good. See, there we vote differently, but we all have civility towards one another. We can do it. See, we just proved it.
Amen.
You both have a great Sunday night.
Big.
Take care, both of you. Dream.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.